when 9/11 happened, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, and it was called Windows on the World. And on that day, 73 immigrant workers died, and about 250 workers lost their jobs. And the union that was inside that restaurant at that time was HCRA Local 100. They called me and one of the head waiters from Windows and said, could you start a new organization that would initially support the workers who had lost their jobs, actually not just at Windows, but the 13,000 restaurant workers who had lost their jobs in the months and weeks following the tragedy. And so we did. My co-founder, who's an immigrant from Morocco, his name is Fekak Mamdou, he was a lead waiter at Windows on the World. He and I started the organization, and initially it was just a relief center to help people get back on their feet. But literally within months following the tragedy, we were overwhelmed with cries for help from restaurant workers, first all over New York City, and then all over the country. And we just didn't know why. Why were people calling us from all over New York City and all over the country? And we found out pretty quickly. We did a lot of research, and that's the basis for everything that you'll find in the book. And over the last 12 years, we've grown into a national organization. We now have 10,000 members in 25 cities around the country, including Chicago. I want to really recognize the members and staff of Rock Chicago that are here in the room today. Could you stand up? Because we really want to recognize the work that you do on an everyday basis. There are more coming in. You know, we're all over the country. We've grown so rapidly as a result of all of this overwhelming demand from restaurant workers all over the country, and we've done a lot. In the last 12 years, we've organized and won 13 campaigns against large, high-profile restaurant companies, winning $7 million in stolen tips and wages, and more importantly, policy changes like paid sick days and benefits and raises and promotions and job security and grievance procedures for literally thousands of workers in these companies. But at the same time, we've actually organized what we call high-road employers who are doing the right thing, providing good wages and good working conditions. We've got about 100 of these employers around the country that really are responsible, partners in trying to say, look, there's a different way of doing business. You can actually treat your workers well and pay them well and still make a profit. Some of you may have seen me with one of them on MSNBC this weekend on Saturday. I was up with Chris Hayes with one of our great partners, Tom Colicchio, who's the star of Top Chef, a really great employer who believes in good wages, good benefits, and promoting from within. And part of that idea of promoting the high road to profitability has actually been opening our own worker-owned restaurants called Colors. So the first trailer you saw was actually filmed in our restaurant, Colors Restaurant. We don't treat our workers that way. That was staged. But it is our restaurant, and we have a second restaurant like that in Detroit. We're opening a third restaurant like that in New Orleans. These restaurants are open to the public in the evening, and during the day, they house our training programs. We train about 1,000 low-wage workers a year in livable wage job skills. And then we also do a ton of research and policy work. We've won some local policy victories. We have some amazing news about a federal policy campaign that's just exploding, and today was a very special day for us, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I have to say, 12 years ago, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know anything about the restaurant industry. In fact, I had just graduated from law school and graduate school. I was living in New York City. I was actually a labor organizer. I was organizing custodial workers and factory workers and domestic workers. And I would go every evening back to Manhattan or Brooklyn and eat in New York City's greatest restaurants. When I would come to Chicago, I would enjoy the great restaurants you have here. And one of the things I argue in the book is that I think, like me, most Americans, many Americans, we celebrate so many of our special, intimate moments in restaurants, birthdays, anniversaries, proposals. I was proposed to in a restaurant, really important meetings. We celebrate American culture in restaurants, and yet I'm ashamed to say that I can recall very few, I think only one person in all those years that I actually knew their name and I knew the person who touched my food. And I was a labor organizer. because generally, purposefully, the people who touch our food are invisible. And for most Americans who eat out, and eat out very regularly, we don't pay attention to the folks behind the kitchen door or the people who are the invisible hands bringing food to our tables. So I didn't know any of this stuff. I knew something about tipping. You know, as a New Yorker, they tell you need to tip 20%, so I would do that. I had no idea that my tips were not something on top of a wage, but that they were the wage itself. I had no idea that for the last 22 years, the minimum wage for tipped workers has been frozen at $2.13 an hour, not because that's the organic way of the world, but because back in 1996, a man named Herman Cain, you may remember him, was the head of the National Restaurant Association and struck a deal with Congress saying that we, the National Restaurant Association, the other NRA, which has been named the 10th most powerful lobbying group in Congress, will not oppose the overall minimum wage continuing to rise as long as the minimum wage for tipped workers stays frozen forever at $2.13 an hour, and so it has. For the last 22 years, it's been stuck at $2.13 an hour. I come from California, so I knew something about sanitation in restaurants because in Los Angeles, they actually put letter grades in restaurants about health and safety. So I knew something about sanitation, health and safety. I knew I didn't want to get sick, but I had no idea that 90% of restaurant workers in America do not have paid sick days, which means that 2/3 cook, prepare, and serve food when they're sick. The stories you saw in the trailer are true stories from my book. H1N1, pink eye, I could go on and on and on, but I'm not sure if you've eaten dinner yet. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. I had no idea this was going on. I had seen the celebrity chef shows. I knew something about celebrity chefs vying to make it to the top. I had no idea that for millions of workers of color in this industry, getting to the top, which is just a livable wage job, is often a matter of their skin color or their gender. I had no idea about these things. There are over 10 million restaurant workers in America. It is one of the largest and fastest growing sectors of the U.S. economy. 1 in 10 Americans works in the restaurant industry, and it is one of the only sectors of the economy to grow during the economic crisis of the last couple of years. Unfortunately, it also happens to be the employer of 7 of the 10 lowest paying jobs in America, and the 2 absolute lowest paying jobs in America, lower than every other occupation, farm workers, domestic workers, day labor, lower than every other occupation, restaurant workers, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, are the lowest paid workers in America. This is no accident, right? There is a powerful lobby that is led by large multi-million-dollar restaurant corporations that have lobbied Congress and state legislatures to keep the minimum wage as low as it is, at $2.13 for tipped workers at the federal level, at $4.95 for tipped workers here in the state of Illinois. There's a powerful lobby, and what is the result of that? The result of that is that the people who put food on our table, food servers, have 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce and suffer from using food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. So you've got the largest industry proliferating the lowest paid jobs in America, and the people putting food on our tables cannot afford to put food on their own tables, cannot afford to feed themselves.